My guest today is Professor Dani Bassett, who is professor at the University of Pennsylvania with appointments in the Departments of Bioengineering, Electrical and Systems Engineering, Physics and Astronomy, Neurology, and Psychiatry. They're also an external professor of the Santa Fe Institute. Bassett is most well known for blending neural and systems engineering to identify fundamental mechanisms of cognition and disease in human brain networks. My other guest today is Professor Perry Zurn, who is Associate Professor of Philosophy at American University. He researches primarily in political philosophy, critical theory, and has collaborated in psychology and network neuroscience. He is especially interested in the politics of inquiry and voice, material histories of resistance, poetics, and ecologies. Welcome, Dani and Perry.
Thanks for having us.
You. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. So, obviously, I don't have a deep background in the subjects, but I'm really interested in this. And I have a couple of your papers, and so I want to start with sort of the context setting paper, and it's entitled "Hunters, Busybodies, and the Knowledge Network Building Associated with Deprivation Curiosity." You say here. So in abstract, you say the open-ended and internally driven nature of curiosity makes characterizing the information seeking that accompanies it a daunting endeavor. We use an historico-philosophical taxonomy of information seeking, coupled with a knowledge network building framework, to capture styles of information seeking in 149 participants as they explore Wikipedia for over 5 hours, spanning 21 days. So generally speaking, it's a small sample set, and we're going to talk about a much, much larger sample set later. So what do you find? So before we get the details of this, you say hunters and busybodies. So let's start there. What do you mean by those?
Well, this project really began before that article. I was studying the philosophy of curiosity, and there wasn't a whole lot of work being done on it. And I had spent some time trying to refine the definition of curiosity, but then I also wanted to spend some time just collecting descriptions of curiosity across the history of Western thought. And as I was collecting those descriptions, I noticed some repetitive styles, you might say, or archetypes of curiosity. And the hunter and the busybody are two of those. So again, within the history of Western thought, some people are described as being curious in a way that they hunt down answers. They're very focused, they're very targeted, they have a plan, they know what they're looking for. And on the other hand, you have people who are described as busybodies or maybe butterflies, people who jump from topic to topic to topic, and their curiosity isn't targeted. They don't know in advance what they're looking for. Rather, they are kind of saturate themselves with new information, interesting information. And both are curious, but both are curious in very distinct ways. And as we started talking about it, Dani thought, I think we could mobilize that in a more concretely scientific way.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to know, can we take these ideas of the hunter and the busybody and translate them into a network language? Can we mathematize them? Can we calculate who's a busybody and who's a hunter by how they move through knowledge spaces? And so that's really where this project got off the ground.
So I don't know. This is in your research, Dani. So are there any correlations? I'm thinking correlations with professions. And one could argue you don't want a nuclear operator to be a busybody, a nuclear power plant operator, or a doctor for that matter. So do you see a correlation between people sort of gravitating toward those? I mean, there are multiple, I mean, even engineering, sort of in that vein, gravitating toward those professions and how they're sort of curiosity. Is there any correlations that you have found?
Yeah, we don't know yet whether there are people in specific careers that have certain kinds of curiosity, but we do think that there's one kind of curiosity that is highly valued by many careers, and that is the hunter style of curiosity. So this is one that is very
Yeah,
focused, that it is
yeah.
really seeking to ask very directed questions.
I think we also, though, suspect that in almost every field, having a capacity to practice multiple styles of curiosity at once will make you a better version of that engineer, that doctor, that
Mm,
aviator, whatever it
mhm,
is. Some kind of balance
mm.
of practice around these issues.
Yeah, so sort of context specific curiosity profile. So Peria, if I understand you correctly, it's a little bit of a sort of flexibility question, which is, when you go into an operating theater, you don't want to be curious. You're just going to follow the manual, so to speak. But then that doesn't tie you down when you get out of there and think about other things or think about, emerging research ideas, right? So it is. So is this what you call? I don't know if you do this in this paper or the next one. Is this what you call the dancer? No, that's different, right?
Right, the dancer's a third style. The dancer's someone who is creative in their curiosity. So when they ask questions about what they want to know, really they want to create something new. They want to create new ideas rather than gather information or ideas that have already been established by somebody else. Um, but I'm not sure about. It's funny that you ask about the operating theater because our father is a orthopedic surgeon. But honestly, I think, yeah, sure, you need to have a hunter-like curiosity in order to be a good surgeon. You have to be very focused and have like expertise in a particular area, know everything there is to know about it. But as people who do surgery know, when you get in there, you may be surprised by what you see or what you end
Yeah.
up needing to do. And so you have to be able to crack out of that hunter-like style pretty quickly and think broadly about the human organism, about the area in which you're working, about possible solutions that would be creative and maybe no one has tried. Like you also need to have already flexed or practiced these other styles too in order
Mm.
to be the best version of a surgeon in your area.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I haven't really thought of. So my daughter's an OBGYN, and my general perspective is that, you get into the operating room and then what you're going to do. But then, as you say, in orthopedics and other areas, yeah, I mean, there are always surprises. It's not like every human being is the same. And so it helps you in some way to be creative in multiple types of curiosity dimensions, right? In some ways.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think even for our areas, we've both thought a lot about how each of these styles of curiosity are helpful. So, for example, in science, at the very beginning of a scientific project, you might be more curious like a busybody. You might be moving between different ideas, going to conferences, listening to talks outside of your area, really
Mm.
having a very open mind. And then as you hone in on one scientific question, one hypothesis that you want to test, you become more hunter-like in your curiosity style, and you really want to
Mm.
understand the answer to that specific question. And then at the end of a research project in science, you become a little bit more like the dancer because you're seeing how your results or your discovery can impact other fields that are distant from yours, or a different theory or another method or algorithm. So you become more expansive in how you think about the interesting next questions. So even as a scientific scholar, the three are being used consistently.
Mm. Yeah, so I haven't really thought about this. uh, Sort of a space and time component. Curiosity. It changes with time and it changes with context, perhaps. So this goes back to uh, uh, so let me ask you this differently. So all the that I mean, look at a large data here on 150 participants. But they, do you see a flexibility con-teaching, curiosity type thing. I don't know how to exactly articulate it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in this study, people were browsing Wikipedia. So it was, in some sense, one context. We weren't able to see them move between curiosity in the workspace and curiosity in their relationships and curiosity about the news or the political climate. So we weren't able to see that. But we were able to look at how people were curious at the beginning of the 3 weeks, the middle of the 3 weeks, and the end of the 3 weeks. So we could really watch and see whether there are weekly fluctuations or even daily fluctuations. And we did find that people
Mm.
varied. So there is some flexibility around their curiosity style. In fact, what we found is that on days when people have high levels of what's called sensation seeking, so this means that they wake up that day and they're excited to experience life. On those days, they browse more like busybodies. They move across broader spaces. They read about a diversity of topics. And then on days when they have less sensation seeking, so they're sort of calmer and more um, focused on things that the sensations that they're familiar with, then they browse more like hunters. So there's even there is broad flexibility across weeks, but there's even daily fluctuations dependent on your mood.
Depending on your mood. Yeah. So um, I might have a new archetype for you,
Oh,
Danny. So
good. We'd love
uh,
to know.
uh, I don't know. I mean, it might be end of one thing. So I am sort of an anti-hunter. Um, it's such a curious phenomenon because I was an engineer and I did a lot of work in quantitative fields, but I get depressed after solving a problem. I want to break it somehow so that I can go look for something else.
Mm.
So I am sort of the ultimate busybody. I'm interested in every topic that I could possibly think about. But on the other hand, I'm not that interested in people. So I don't know if you found that in the
Hmm.
data. I'm not that interested in people's place, history, um, but I'm just interested in concepts.
Hmm.
That's sort of a very constrained view of curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Perry, I'm kind of curious where your mind is going with that, but maybe I'll start off just by saying that um in the history of the study of curiosity, at least in the scientific space, there has been a focus on the area that you're curious about. So it is a context dependent interest. So people say, well, I'm curious about sports, and I'm curious about political history, and I'm curious about plant um, physiology or something. And each person
Yeah.
has their own area that they're interested in. Um, so what we
Mm,
have been doing in this analysis is to say, let's remove your interest space for a second and
mm,
just ask, how do you move in that space? Do you move more like a busybody?
yeah.
Do you move more like a hunter or more like a dancer? But then what we haven't done yet is to put these two pieces back together again and say,
Mm,
well, how do they potentially interact? Do busybodies who are excited about cultural spaces, do they browse slightly differently than busybodies who are interested in scientific
mm,
concepts? So we haven't looked at the intersections between these two
mm.
ways of thinking about curiosity in a thorough way yet. We have some initial findings, but it's not a thorough investigation yet. Perry, where were you
Mm.
having some thoughts too? I think you're muted.
You might
Yeah,
be muted.
yeah. No, I think this is that raises a question about the structure of each of those knowledge spaces, which might also not just be knowledge spaces, but material spaces. So does busybodying look different when it comes to an interest in people versus an interest in scientific or engineering concepts, for example? Well, that might have to do a lot with the already existing structure of the people, which is not universal in any given era or culture, or like
Mm,
the structure of people themselves and sociality is going to affect how it's possible to move between them or ask questions about them. And similarly with science, I mean, the contemporary
mm,
structure of engineering knowledge right now is going to be very different than engineering knowledge in 1500
Mm.
AD, for example. So and how one could be a
mm,
busybody in those spaces would in fact look different. So I mean, there's a lot of really interesting questions. But what I was also keyed in on was your sharing your sort of depression after solving something, and
yes,
this is
yes.
not something we've spent a lot of time actually thinking about with respect to curiosity. And there's a real bias in the literature, I think, that assumes that satisfying one's curiosity is in fact satisfying. Which in fact maybe it's not. I find I get very depressed after I finish a book or a big project. I'm so sad it's over. I can't, I and like I've created a whole world and now I've
Yeah.
lost the world, right? Because I finished the world, and that's devastating. So I vibe with you here.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you go to academics, for in both of you are academics, I wondered, um, there is an aspect to it, right? So as you write that paper, you get it accepted, get published, and then you say, well, that's done. I mean, I could have done something more there, you know. The thought or after effect, maybe I mean, I'm just making a statement. I don't know. I'm not an academic, but maybe it's more prevalent in academics, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think there's a lot of grief, maybe, when you finish a project, because you can't finish all those small questions that were still lingering
Yeah.
at the end of a project. You sort of wait and you know you have to focus on the next big question that you think will actually lead to another publication. And some of these small ones, I mean, small and big is something that you get an intuition for the more you're in science, I think. But yeah, you kind
Mm,
of let the little ones go and focus on the next
mm,
big one. There's also a social or personal component to this as well, because in science, the work is done on the ground by graduate students or postdoctoral
yeah.
researchers, and they have careers that move them after, a couple years. The PhD students have a PhD and they move on and they tackle new questions,
Mm,
and the postdocs move on after 2 or 3 years and set up their own lab. And the specific area that they were focusing on, there's nobody in that space anymore, or they're taking it off in a different direction. And as a faculty member, you support their flight by making sure that you don't
mm,
work in that space anymore, to give them room, for their
mm,
scientific
yeah.
investigations or discoveries. So again, there's a little bit of a sadness of watching those questions kind of fly away with them. Um, yeah,
Right.
thankfully,
Oh, that sounds
most
so
of us
interesting.
can be
Yeah.
excited about many different things, so we get distracted
Yes.
fairly quickly by a new question. So it's a
Yes.
short
With
time
the next
scale
question. Yeah.
sadness. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Puri, I think you mentioned this. So, yeah, it's in professional settings where I think companies value this hunting behavior, focus, get it done. That's all I care about, and you get promoted or something like that. Um, and so, even if you are sort of naturally a hunter, if you work for a company for some time, they'll make you a hunter because that's a way to add shareholder value, right? So I don't know if it is, I mean, there must be some data on this, like entry of, young graduates into a company, you measure them, and then 10 years later, they're all hunting for something. uh, so can you do some sort of longitudinal? I mean, it's going to take time, but some sort of longitudinal way how people change in a context.
I think that sounds really fascinating, to do a longitudinal study, especially in a work environment. or maybe a couple of different work environments to see how the training and styles of curiosity happens. I also think it's, for me, I would want to pay attention to how the people who stay there in that company change,
Mm.
but also what are some of the characteristics of the people who leave or the people who are fired. um, right? So
Yes, yes.
is there a
Yeah.
certain inability or just refusal, a sort of like it's not worth it for me to change my style of curiosity for you, and there are other ways I want to live my
Mm.
life? Or is there, I mean, sometimes for myself in the academy, I feel a little bit of two minds. So I can do the things that are expected of me and produce in the way that I'm expected to produce, and I need a lot of room for creativity and to do things that none of the people that I know are like, yes, that's good, you should do that. I want to be able to
Mm.
squander my attention too. And thankfully I have enough energy to do both things, the focused projects and then the squandering projects. But
Mm.
so it'd be interesting to see too if some of the people in as we're trained or acculturated in a given work environment, if we develop these two minds, or if we kind of fall out
Mm.
or drop out, or if we get just better at the one thing we're really supposed to do.
We're going on a tangent a little bit, Perry, but I want to take a detour very quickly. Um, so there's definitely a sort of a cultural alignment question. So, for instance, if I go into a company, I'm naturally a busy, and the company is trying to make me a hunter, unhappy, maybe. But there is another archetype that says, okay, I mean, this is what I have to do. That's what I'm going to do. And then I change to that archetype. So now we can think about, sort of societal things. So the countries that we know, places like Finland, Norway, New Zealand, quite interesting to see if happiness is actually correlated with this idea that your natural curiosity profile gives you a way to live, basically. It doesn't exist in companies in the US, right? I mean, if you go in there, you go to produce, that's about it. I mean, there's nothing else. Um, yeah, I mean, there is a tension in terms of happiness at an aggregate societal level, possibly, right?
Yeah, well, and Danny, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the correlations you've seen, like from culture to culture or space to space, in expectations of curiosity styles? Or
Yeah, well, we definitely. So I think the broad question you're asking is whether if there's an alignment between your curiosity style and the job you're in or the way of living that you have access to, if those two are aligned, then you might be happy. And I think that's a really
Yeah.
interesting question. It's not something we've directly addressed. However, we have addressed some cultural differences in curiosity styles, and we've also have some initial data to suggest there are relationships with mental health. So, for example, in our first study of
Mm,
149 participants in the laboratory, we found that there was a
yeah.
correlation with taking small steps through the Wikipedia page, so more like hunters, slightly more like hunters.
Yeah.
Those individuals tended to have slightly higher levels of depression and anxiety, and that's not to
Uh,
say these are not individuals who are diagnosed with depression or anxiety. So these are subclinical levels. This is kind of just variation among
mm,
people, typical variation among people. But what we found is that there's a relationship where people who are more depressed tend to take smaller
mm,
steps. So walking a little bit more like hunters. Um, that's only a small group of people, though, right? And so it would be very important to demonstrate that that relationship is consistent over a larger group of people. So I would say that that's some
mm,
initial evidence, but needs validation. So just kind of mark that, I guess. And then secondly, we have
yeah.
evaluated the relationship between curiosity styles and different cultures in the sense that we do see variations in curiosity styles across countries. And specifically, what we observe is
Yeah.
that countries that have higher greater education equality and gender equality tend to have more people who are browsing like busybodies. So across a diversity of topics and spanning a wide space, taking big steps on the Wikipedia network. So in contrast, those countries that have less education equality and less gender equality tend to have browsers who browse more like hunters. So there is a relationship between large, global factors like equality and the characteristic way in which people are moving on Wikipedia that suggests that there's a lot more to understand about the potential drivers of difference.
That's really fascinating, Danny. So there could be some diagnostic possibilities here that we sort of observe a subject, how he or she is browsing, and that might give us some indication. I mean, obviously it's not perfect, but some indication of their mental state, especially if you have a baseline measurement prior to that. So you have a baseline measurement, and then you take another measurement, and then you see the sort of the variance between the two. That might be diagnostic in some ways, possibly.
I think it would be so interesting to have a study where we follow people more longitudinally. Yeah, and understand a little bit more about variations of the curiosity style across time and under natural variations of mental health, because all of us have natural variations over weeks, months, and even years. So I
Yeah.
think doing a study like that would be extremely exciting, even in healthy individuals. And what you're gesturing towards is also, or not gesturing, explicitly talking about, is doing that also with people who have particular mental health challenges. And I think that that would be especially exciting.
There's also in this context,
Yeah.
it's been interesting because prior scholarship has, on the whole, kind of characterized people with greater anxiety or depression as being less curious. So that's kind of the tradition in the psychological literature. But I know we're both interested in flipping that on its head and asking, how are people with generalized anxiety curious? How are people with depression curious? How are people with a variety of conditions or descriptions, however they would describe themselves, or neurodivergences, how are they curious in a way that doesn't immediately separate out health from, or doesn't immediately connect health and curiosity, right? But actually questions both
Yeah.
characterizations.
Right. Yeah. So I want to conclude on this paper. So I just want to get some sort of definitions. You say here we create networks in which nodes represent distinct concepts, edges represent the similarity between concepts, and we're going to talk more about this in the larger study. We quantify the tightness of knowledge networks using graph theoretical indices and use a generative model of network growth to explore mechanisms underlying information seeking. So could you talk a little bit about what you mean by knowledge networks, how they grow, what we can learn from them?
Yeah, absolutely. So when people are the way that we think about knowledge networks is that a concept often we will call the node in the network, and then a relationship between two concepts would be an edge in the network. So you can imagine building a
Yeah.
large network of many concepts and their relationships. In the context of Wikipedia, we choose each website or each site on Wikipedia to be a node. So that's on a particular topic. And then the relationship between two pages on Wikipedia, we calculate by assessing how their semantic similarity. So that's dependent on the similarity in the words that are being used and the meanings behind the words. So a page that's on toads and a page that's on frogs is going to have a pretty strong semantic similarity because they're going to share a lot of words and also a lot of have shared meaning. By by contrast, a page on rhododendrons and a page on the late Queen of England will be very distant from one another because there's not a lot of similar words and definitely not a lot of similar meanings either. So what we can do is that we can define every page as a node, every relationship between pages as an edge, and we can capture all of the pages that people walk through and how small or large the steps were between those pages. So that creates networks for each person. And then we can analyze the structure or topology or shape of those networks.
Yeah, I don't know if this is in your research, Danny, but where does ADHD, the condition that appears to be growing all around the world, how does ADHD fit into this question?
Mm. It's a great, yeah, it's a great question. We don't know because we don't have information on ADHD diagnoses in our participants in the 149 person study, and we also don't have it in the larger study across the world. So that's a very, very open question. I will say, maybe harking back to what Perry was saying earlier, that we do think that each type or kind of neurodivergence is going to be related to differences in curiosity styles. The big question is just how. What is the way in which a person's curiosity with ADHD, how does it look? How is it different from somebody who doesn't have ADHD? So at the moment, those are open questions, but we do hypothesize that there will be differences, and we're excited to kind of unpack what those are.
And I would add just briefly that I think characterizing and celebrating the busybody as a curiosity style already sets us up to think about ADHD as not a lack of curiosity, just mere superficial, just transit between ideas, but rather as its own form or style of curiosity. So I think just starting to identify and characterize and set out and celebrate a number of styles already helps us change, again, a long-standing association of curiosity with really just one way or just a couple ways of kind of working with material and with information. We want to diversify. We think there's a lot more going on with curiosity than literatures in all the fields we work in have given it credit for.
And then, a larger context is the autism spectrum as well. And so, I think there's an axis here that is sort of could be quite interesting to explore. Since I want to go into the larger study, architectural style of curiosity in global Wikipedia mobile app readership. So you say here, internally motivated in is an expression of curiosity believed to be central to human nature. However, most curiosity research relies on small, Western convenient samples. We analyze a naturalistic population of about 500,000 readers using Wikipedia's mobile app in 14 languages from 50 countries. By measuring the structure of knowledge networks constructed by readers, weaving a thread through articles in Wikipedia, we replicate two studies previously identified in laboratory studies. So you're sort of confirming what you identified in the lab study with a very small sample set. So from 150 to 500,000 now in 50 different countries. So span cultures, spans languages, 14 different languages, and you find this reasonably the same idea, right?
Yeah, we definitely, in the sense that we see busybodies and we see hunters and we see a variety of people in between. And we see that those kinds of styles are present across 50 different countries and 14 different languages. So yes, the kind of what we observe is that these styles that we had identified before in 149 people, just in the Philadelphia area, are also present across the world and in different languages. So yes. It's comforting.
Right.
We did
Okay,
more in the paper, but at least we also replicated some earlier things.
Yeah, we had this intuition that it were approximately the same, they're clones of each other, unfortunately. And so, so I want to ask you something slightly different. This is not something that you research, but so we have this whole thing going on in artificial intelligence. And, I've been harping on this idea that AI is going to kill curiosity. it's going to kill your ability to ask questions because essentially you go to the web and you type in your prompt and out comes the answer. I mean, the brain uses 20% of your energy budget, and the brain is always going to say, hey, if I don't have to think about it, I'm perfectly happy about it. And so do you see in the long run AI, as they call it? I've been doing AI type thing for about 30 years, but I don't know what it means. But this AI, that people call it now, is going to create some problems for humanity in the long run.
It's such an interesting question. When we, yeah, I have so many thoughts. I have to try to organize them here for a second. But when we actually began this project, one of our questions was, well, Perry had previously found the hunter and busybody as styles of curiosity 2,000 years ago. And since then, there's been a
Yeah.
massive explosion in the information age. The internet happened. People don't read books as much anymore. There's a lot of change in how we engage with information. So we were both
Mm.
really curious about whether we were going to still see the same styles from 2,000 years ago or whether we would see completely different styles now. And what we found
Mm.
is that the
Yeah.
styles today are similar to what they were, at least in description, 2,000 years ago in the Western intellectual tradition. So that suggests to me that
That's
there's some
gratifying. That's
longevity.
gratifying for me.
Yes, yeah, it's
Yeah.
gratifying. Yeah, there's some
Yeah.
longevity to these styles, something that is maybe just inherently, human about them, and that
Mm.
irrespective of what's happening in the way we're the kind of information we're engaging in, we may engage with it in similar styles. So then the question for me is, as AI becomes a more critical component or a more present component, I should say, in our lives, um, how will we be engaging our curiosity in that context? So will we how would we busybody with or around or separate from um, chat gpt, for example, or how would we
Mm.
hunt, with AI or around AI or separate from chat gpt? I think
Mm.
I'm sort of curious about how these styles that I think are just part of being human, how we will use them in
Yeah.
this new context. And what I think I I I hope that in this new context, we continue to prioritize engaging a diversity of curiosities, because I think that
Mm.
is what's going to keep us moving forward. In the creation of knowledge, but also in the creation of knowledge, hopefully ethically. And so I think that that's something that
Yeah.
I think about a lot.
I also think,
Mm.
as
Yeah.
professors, we think a lot about our students and how they're negotiating the rise of AI as well. And I think one of the things that's certainly true, I like the emphasis on how do each of us negotiate information with various styles and in conjunction or not in conjunction with AI. But I also think it's important to recognize, even with algorithms, for example, how they have already and consistently shape the landscape in which we could be hunters or busybodies or dancers. So
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
thinkable close steps are framed for us already. And for when now that
Yep.
Google has the AI option first for information, it's already setting up. These are the main talking points. These would be the peripheral, like what you would go to next, or this would be like kind of out of left field, right? It's already setting up for you. If you are a hunter, this is what you would read or what you would think about. If you are a busybody, this is what you. So it's kind of it's deciding the landscape for us in advance. And I guess not only would I hope for a kind of practice of a flexibility of styles, but also a really deep, what do I want to say, capacity to second guess structures of knowledge that are just given to us, and that's been important for 2,000 years or 4,000 years and beyond, right? And it will be important for another 2,000 years and another 4,000 years and beyond, is our capacity to say, hey, look, just because this is the landscape of knowledge that's handed to me doesn't mean it has to be this way, or that there isn't some other way to organize it or kind of interact with it. And I think for us, for me, giving my students tools to really grapple with, for example, archival materials or material objects or like real stuff. How many different ways can you think about this real stuff, this kind of and think around the ways people have told you to think about it. If I can help students strengthen that muscle, I think they can at least engage, yeah, maybe more ethically and more creatively in a world where the confines of knowledge are being reshaped.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I'm thinking, Perry, that suppose curiosity is a hardware concept. I think this is where Danny was heading in some ways. So we find as you found 2,000 years ago, sort of same styles. We find the same styles now. So maybe it's a hardware concept, not a software one, meaning it is inherent to humans. And so it's not going to be changed by, search companies or AI companies, at least for a while. I don't know what's going to happen 100 years from now. But it's also evolutionarily important, I would imagine, right? So now I'm thinking maybe 100,000 years ago, a clan was 100 people, 150 people, let's say. And maybe there was an optimum busybody to hunter ratio in a clan that made them survive and thrive, because you cannot be all hunters, because you wake up in the morning, you go hunt, and then you're going to be eaten by the lion. There's a sort of hiding somewhere. But if you have a couple of busybodies in there, say, well, let me go behind this bush and that bush. So maybe there was an optimum ratio. So let me ask you differently. So in the population, is there do you know what the percentage of what you might call busybody and a hunter is in the aggregate population?
Yeah, we see a fairly normal distribution from very
Normally,
busybody-like to very hunter-like. So there isn't a preference that I can see from the data.
so that sort of implies that combination was you you need some busybodies, you need hunters, and that's how society thrived. But now we have dropped this AI thing into it, and suppose the AI thing reduces, let's say, I'm just speculating here, Ferry, and I know nothing about, reduces the busybody percentage in the population. That has implications for society, right, in the long run?
It definitely has implications. I mean, if there's a change, yeah, a skew in styles, it would change the way that we discover knowledge and the way that knowledge grows, I think, over time. So it would skew the trajectory of knowledge.
It's because trajectory of knowledge, and I mean, you guys are both dealing with students on a daily basis, and that is a natural lab setting. And so, do you see the trend sort of creeping into into the classroom that they say, well, give me the paper, I'll come back tomorrow, I have written the paper, maybe using GPT, I don't know. But is this sort of creeping into the classroom right now?
Oh yes, it's not creeping, it's loudly announcing itself. And I think honestly, I think there have always been students who don't put in the work, and that can be for all sorts of reasons. They can be ill prepared, they can be anxious, they can be terrified, they can be not supported well in school, they can be having something going on. Like there's all kinds of reasons, but there've always been students who will find a way to submit work that they didn't do. And sometimes, especially when I really started teaching, it was more likely to be purchased work. work that was purchased or paid for. And then it became a little bit
Oh.
easier to just cut and paste Wikipedia, speaking of Wikipedia, into a paper. And now it's even more accessible in a sense to more students. So there's not just the bar of, do you know how to kind of hide your copy paste of Wikipedia? It's not a bar of, do you have enough money to purchase the work? But it's free, it's available, anyone can use it at any time, and every answer that gets spit out is different. So it's not like the professor can track it back like they can to Wikipedia to say, hey, look, I see exactly those words here. You know, ChatGPT made that impossible. So it's much easier. So I think our challenge is to invite students to think long term about what capacities they're building in themselves to make them more valuable than the computer they're relying on, right? Because if you want to have a job, I think that's what you're going to have to be able to prove. So simply letting a computer do your work for you is not going to set you up for the future you want.
Yeah, so I understand that. I mean, you guys know more about this than I do. Admissions officers of university stopped reading essays. 20 years ago, could read essays and get a good idea of the personality of the applicant. But now, yeah, there's no way one could assess the students or the applicant's personality anymore. And so I understand that have stopped reading essays, asking students to write them. I don't know what the goal is there. Is UPenn or American University this dimension?
Yeah, Dani, what do you think about admissions here?
I have not talked to admissions about how they may or may not be changing their criteria. So I don't, Perry, have you?
No, but I mean, certainly you review graduate admissions. Do you do that? And the essays there. So is it going to change how you read such essays?
Mm,
Or not?
yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think often what I'm looking for is an essay. I mean, from the beginning, the kinds of essays that I look for are the ones that surprise me, that tell an unusual story or share an unexpected experience or perspective on the world or something like that. And I think that is still, I think, going to be a criteria because the way that ChatGPT usually works is that it provides something that reads more more kind of middle of the road. So I think detecting that's something I think, Perry, that students need to learn how to do is to detect unusualness or difference or being able to detect the creative idea, the out of the box idea, the piece that's unusual, I think is going to be increasingly important because ChatGPT is going to, or all kinds of AI are going to be able to show you what's typical, that they're very good at that. They're built to do that. Yeah.
It's interesting, Danny. So I think it's a matter of time. Suppose prompt ChatGPT or Grok or something. Say I grew up in South India. Give me an unusual story applying to UPenn.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it'll come up with something that could be quite interesting.
That's fair.
Even now.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I think we are on a slippery slope here in many ways. So I want to touch on something else here. We identify associations, you say, globally between the structure of knowledge networks and population level indicators of spatial navigation, education, mood, well-being, and inequality. Yes, we talked about happiness, but there are other dimensions here. So you are finding relationships uh, between the structure of knowledge networks and these things, mood, well-being, education, and so on. So could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So across these different countries, there are a variety of different indicators of that culture. And those include the two that I mentioned earlier, education equality and gender equality, but they also include measures of well-being as well as cognitive differences, like in spatial navigation, for example. We see spatial navigation, that metric, as a more general indicator of certain kinds of cognitive functions that may be supported by the educational practices of that culture, and also the local lifestyles of the individuals. So I think there are a range of relationships between the network structures and these variables. I think I will say that while that's exciting, and I especially think it's exciting to see the relationships with mood, but also with inequality, those are exciting, but I think it's tricky to figure out what is driving those relationships. So while I'm excited about them, this is a place where I'm ready for the next study. I want to keep digging because it's not satisfying yet. I don't know why these relationships exist. I don't know what is different about the cultures that may be explaining why education inequality is related to differences in Wikipedia use. So I think I am frustrated by not having a causal explanation for these relationships, and I would like to do more work there.
I also have a frustration with that paper, or an unanswered question about it, when that's the correlation between the busybody style curiosity and kind of social science, social interests, history, and these sorts of topics on Wikipedia versus the association or correlation between the hunter-like style and more scientific topics. Again, going back to what we said before, the good scientists and good social scientists and good historians and good artists do this kind of wide interest, busybody-like investigation and focused investigation, and they're creative, right? So that fell that cleanly makes me question why and how. Is it because people are trained in each of these fields to overdevelop one muscle? It's not obvious to me why that correlation showed up the way it did.
Yeah.
There's a language issue here too. So if I remember correctly, in front of me, these were largely English-speaking countries. I know that India was included, but most of Asia wasn't. Um, so I mean, there's clearly a bias, language-based bias, um, and these are maybe populations who have who are reading English-based publications and stuff like that. So it's very difficult to generalize, isn't it? I mean, even with 500,000 people, it's still there are biased dimensions in there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. There are 50 different countries. So it is broader. I mean, it's not to say that there isn't English being spoken in all those countries. There is English spoken in all those countries. But there are also 14 different language Wikipedias. So the data comes from the English Wikipedia, but also from the German Wikipedia and many other languages. So that suggests, and we see consistent relationships, across it. Well, I think we should. I mean, I don't want to exclude your worry because, or I don't know if it's worry, but your thought, because it's still the case that English is consistently being used in many countries, and it's an interesting question about whether it would be, how much does that potentially bias the way that people are moving? Is it when you're comfortable with one particular language that changes the way your brain or mind moves through certain spaces? It would be really nice to study that. I think I would like to know more about how the structure of somebody's native language could potentially relate to the way that they move through concept spaces. I know this question has a very long history. People have been thinking about how languages might alter how minds work for many decades, probably longer. If I was a historian, I might know more. But I think we have an opportunity to ask questions like that with some rigid or rigorous statistical analysis now that would be, I think, pretty exciting.
And it raises the question of coloniality, really, of a language, right? So if specifically English as a colonial language around the world, and how might it have already set up the stage for curiosity practices in a way that, yeah, we do not fully appreciate.
And then migration, also sort of interesting. So immigrants, for instance, they come from country X to country Y, and country X language. Do we see significant style changes? I wondered, I mean, these are going to be pretty small sample sets in the large context. But so suppose you're forced into a new context that you had no idea about. And then you're forced into care to that context. That might change. I mean, that clearly changes your personality at some point. But I don't know if it changes your curiosity profile. I wondered. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good, interesting question. There's some interesting work on transformative experiences. So when an animal moves into a space where where everything changes, all the rules are different, the environment is completely different. They go through what has been related to so-called transformative experiences. And that's also the case when humans take particular kinds of drugs, for example. So there's this interesting relationship in the scientific literature between studying when an animal moves to a different environment and when a human takes a particular drug. But in both cases, there's evidence for an open-mindedness that occurs or that can occur because the system is in a place where it needs to learn all the new rules or understand what this new environment is, right? And so there are many gates that are opened up, and you have you're receptive in a different way to information than you are when you're in your typical context. And so I think for immigrants, it is possible that change in environment would alter the way in which an individual may be receiving information and the kinds of information that they are open to receiving, and that may alter in some sense or in some way the curiosity style. You could similarly, I mean, you could look at this on shorter timescales. If a student goes to another country for a semester abroad, you could ask questions about whether their curiosity styles changed over that shorter period of time. So I think that the context, this comes back to your earlier comment about context dependence, right? What is it about the context that might influence the ways that we want to move through epistemic spaces?
Well, and might also there be some analysis here, a way of building on code switching literatures, right? So it wouldn't necessarily have to be simply the giant migration experience or a quick trip to another kind of country or a short sojourn there, but it can be moving between a kind of minoritized culture or language or setting or context or belongingness into a more mainstream one and back again consistently. And what kinds of curiosities or structures of curiosities does someone end up practicing? Maybe they're code switching their curiosity style too. Maybe, right? And what would that look like? Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I know that I have to let you go. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thanks so much for spending time with me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. This
Thanks for having us.
a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.